All right, today on The Informer, we're here to discuss the Crown Casinos being granted their licence, surprise, surprise, many aren't that surprised, to open its Sydney casino. And joining us today, we've got victims of crime advocate and solicitor, John Heron. We've got security consultant, ex-military, Croatian military officer and author of Blood and Soil, Mario Beeks. And we've got Ian Cook, director of I Cook Foods and infamous for the Sludgate scandal. Good morning, guys.
Morning.
Good morning.
Now,
Morning, Michael.
Good morning. Now, are we surprised or are we disappointed or are we just more of the same? How would we describe the decision to allow Crown Casino to open?
Specifically with Sydney that you're saying?
We'll start with Sydney, but the entity as a whole.
So with all of the, think about this, with all of the infrastructure, Barangaroo, etc., in Darling Harbour, the question there really is, if they weren't to operate it, what would happen with that? Right? Simply a case of the devil you know, really. So they had to make a public showing and expose, and that's a good thing, and then try and address those issues. But to pull up stumps and just close it down was unfathomable.
I think the problem with that is that makes a mockery of the laws they have in place. I mean, everyone knows gambling attracts the seedy underbelly of society, and then you get politicians saying, "No, it's okay. We can regulate this. We can make sure that this is all above board, and the laws will be in place to stop any money laundering or illegal activity." And yet then when it gets uncovered, and that was a huge job for the investigative journalists that did that work, that uncovered what happened. And then they were forced into a Royal Commission. The Royal Commission finds that they're basically unfit to hold a license. So yes, the infrastructure is there, but maybe, I don't know, you force it into somebody else's hands. But they certainly have to come down and should have come down even harder, I think. Otherwise, you just sit there going, well, why do we have these laws?
Well, if I can add on something on this, particularly in Sydney, everything around the Barangaroo, that precinct, it's actually teeming with the life. Everything else, it's slow on nothing happening. Shops are shut and there's no traffic, foot traffic, there's no tourists and everything else. And when you add on this Barangaroo, just recently built building and entire precinct is over there full of the restaurants, I think that take a decent calculus when they're issuing the license, that this is the part of Sydney which attracts the people. And I agree with Ian that the gambling, it's very, very, lucrative business. And they hope they're going to attract more people to come in Sydney as a tourist and then spend money here.
Surely, though, we could have looked worldwide for other operators with a squeaky clean record to look at it.
I was about to raise that point, is imagine the tender process that would have had to be undertaking. The original Crown Casino license went for several years in Melbourne, perhaps 5 years, I think. So how could you, the tender would run for many, many years. What would operate in the interim? You'd have an interim provider with no interest in implementing any reforms whatsoever. So they'd be looking how to exit as cheaply as possible. So that's why I'm saying it could have been a disaster in the making for that. Also in Sydney and the Royal Commission, they tended to focus a lot on Packer himself. And that was good for the media spin because everyone likes to see a billionaire fall. And in Sydney, particularly if you're there, it's getting the Packers that live at Vaucluse has been a pastime since the days of Goanna and the 1980s.
Yeah, but when we see a billionaire fall, we see James Packer walking away with his 3.3 billion for his 30-something% share in it. Now that Blackstone have just amazingly had the license approved just a few days before needed.
So,
he's got very good lawyers.
Yeah,
very good lawyers, John. Yes, I agree. That's a very good question. How he walks away with that amount of money just a few days before license is issued, and I'm not sure we're gonna ever find out the answer on such things.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, it's just a provisional license. So now they're going to look at them. Now they're going to make sure that they comply. I thought that was any license basically is provisional. You break the rules and you're meant to be gone. So is this just more word games?
Well, there is when you use the term provisional, there is a provisional external manager overseeing this. That certainly has been a result in Melbourne. So that's not such a bad development in its own right.
Mm. Now, you mentioned Melbourne, John. We saw the Crown Casino here slapped with a massive $1 million fine for their breaches. We saw them admit to, I think it was $61 million in tax evasion through, dodgy categorization of their costs. We saw them admit to failing to follow their money laundering laws, and now they're saddled with the burden of paying, I think it's $80 million extra for their pokie machine licenses. They've really been held to account as well, haven't they?
Yes, look, that fine, obviously legislation's been implemented where it's a $100 million fine after the effect. So of course, gladly they pay a $1 million fine, and clawing back the tax. One wonders that maybe we would have been better off with pokies throughout RSLs and the government could have made more money.
Mm. And Ian, this must really stick in your craw as well, especially even through lockdown, where we saw the government enforcement on rules and regulations through the pandemic on individuals and businesses, and their ability to close you down through fictitious or false or whatever allegations you want to categorize it as. And yet it just seems like the more that go into the government coffers, the more you can get away with.
Yeah, it's the same old story. If you are either funding or helping fund anything that has anything to do with this government, then the laws don't apply to you. They only apply when they want to apply them. They only apply to people they want to get rid of. So yes, you're quite right. And I sit and look at that and just shake my head. It becomes a belief issue as well. You sort of sit there and say, all the things that you grew up with and believed in, like we have laws, we follow, we do that, all of that comes tumbling down when you get these situations. And like you say, not just for me, for a whole heap of people running through the pandemic. It's like there was no natural justice for a whole heap of businesses and individuals. So, and I note that Palaszczuk in Queensland is now taxing big business to pay for mental health issues, which one might argue they caused.
Mm. It's the same with the gamble responsibly thing, and that's gambling only seems to be a problem if you're not really good at it. If you're great at it, it seems to be a great thing. But it's why we subsidize gambling when we see the problem it causes, and we see some of the deductions that they do, where they'll say that they've put a television and a playground in there, so it's a community deduction because they're providing a recreational thing. It's just terrible. Can we regulate gambling well enough? And what message does this send, not only to the operators, but to the average Australian?
Whenever there's sorry.
So who regulates this? The Victorian Gaming Authority. I know the CEO, like they're quite committed to putting in initiatives. There's no doubt about that. But it's the other party at the other end, whether they will adhere to them or not, or how they get around it, like the $1 million fine. That's the issue there.
Yeah. Yes, where the fine doesn't match the crime, you have a problem. It was back in the days of the guys that used to go out in black boats and poach abalone, when the fines were $2,000 and $3,000, but the payload was $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. They were happy to pay the fines. Yeah. So until they brought in a 1 strike, 2 strike, 3 strikes, you're out, and that applied to their licenses for crayfish and for abalone, that went with the license. So if you did the wrong thing and you lost one of your strikes on your license, when you tried to sell your license, it only came with 2 strikes left. And then you do something wrong, there's only 1 strike left. So it actually devalued the asset. One wonders whether you might be able to do that with gambling licenses. gambling by its very nature, how you can say, what is it, gamble responsibly. The fact that you're betting on chance, one would argue, is never going to be responsible.
Well, I will say what Michael stipulated was it called gambling reasonable, and it doesn't exist such a thing. You just be reasonable, and justify the gambling or drinking, whatever it is. But the taxes are so great that the government will allow this type of enterprises to operate always, for the simple reason because first it employs a number of the people, and secondly, the taxes are so great that they can contribute to society. And don't forget one thing: doesn't matter what we say here today. As John stipulated, we have the casino has a strong lawyers. No question asked, very strong lawyers. But where's the individuals fitting all of this? Me, you, and anybody else. ATO is going to come so hard on everybody to pay the minimum taxes, and then we are watching that large enterprises going away with the minuscule minimum fines. This is what bothers me, because everybody else is going to pay the fines to the end, and some people who do the money laundering or whatever else they're doing, those corporations, they're going to pay the minimum taxes. This is what worries me, that we're going over this very easily and very lightly as a society.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good point, Mario. One of the things probably that's not evident in the investigations is the actual breakdown on tax revenue back. We know what's potentially been avoided, but what is the exact benefit to the government? There has to be some type of cost benefit analysis floating around somewhere, you would assume, that shows what taxation they are getting out of that, but also it should include the negative impacts on individuals that are problem gamblers, and the destruction it has on, as Andrew Wilkie says, particularly with pokies, and that targets lower socioeconomic people mostly. When you're in the high roller room, and it's if you've been in there, Michael, it's a grand minimum bet type thing. Where is that analysis? Is it worthwhile, the taxation? Is it worthwhile getting $100 million out of it? Part of that revenue is then pushed back into the gaming authority to try and control gambling, but are they not fueling it?
Yeah. And suddenly safe workplaces don't exist. Smoking was allowed in the high rollers room where it was banned from every other facility. There were special rules there. So there's obviously a lot of revenue that instant sugar hit for the government, but are they smart enough or forward looking enough to be able to go, well, we might get our tax in this hand, but then the social impact, the poverty, the marriage breakups, the domestic violence, all of those things that flow on down the track. I don't think they're smart enough to consider those things, or it'll be, that's later, we can worry about that, but we can buy something new and shiny with the cash that we get here, and we can just put that down to other people's own personal responsibility.
I think that's an interesting point, Michael. I'd also argue that where you have a Labor government, you have a government that puts its hand up as being the champion of the underdog, the champion of the worker, the champion of the vulnerable. And yet those, and every study will show that they are the people that are affected by gambling the most. I don't go to pokies and I don't bet on horse races. In fact, if my wife and my mother says go and put a bet on the Melbourne Cup, I've got to ask someone how to fill out the damn form. But that's because in my head, I can see that this is just putting some money down and probably going to lose it. Whereas some people don't see it that way. I mean, I've had people work for me that, one guy in particular, terrific worker, great bloke, just had a terrible gambling problem. And, parts of our cash business, we forgave him a couple of times for theft, literally, because you sit there saying you understood that he literally didn't do it out of maliciousness. It is a sickness, an illness. He spent a lot of time with a psychiatrist trying to get over it.
Yes, and that's a beautiful, wording. Everybody has a sickness, and everybody has issues in the head, mental, psychological, just name them. And as Michael says, gamble responsible or drink responsible or drive responsible, it doesn't exist. Everybody has a choice when they walk to that casino door or any venue where you can put money and gamble, because you're going there purposely, deliberately to make the money, not just to kill the time. And everybody who walks to that door and spend the money, good luck to them. I mean, that's a their choice. Same as you do. I don't go gambling because I don't see never ever walk out to that door with the millions in their hands and want the money. So responsible gambling doesn't exist, but the taxes are one thing which they're great for the society, and they should contribute, because after all, society should get a benefits of the old taxes. But as I say previously, I'm worrying that the taxes are only breaking on the individuals and the small and medium businesses rather than on the large businesses who can walk away with a big crossing the line in legislations and acts with the minimum fines. That's where I'm seeing the biggest problem.
Yeah.
I'll shed some light on the high rollers for you, because it triggered my memory. And I was doing some work with the state government about 15 years ago on drop rates on the casino license, about when people enter. So one of the things, of course, was overseas charter flights and bringing in high roller gamblers. The government moved to stop that. How they do it, I'm not sure. But Crown in the early days was having charter flights from Malaysia, Singapore, etc., that would come in here before a lot of the casinos opened in Asia themselves. But as I said, I'd been in the high roller room because at the time I was working for a Chinese tycoon, and I saw some extraordinary things in there, such as people betting on baccarat. They'd win 10 grand and they couldn't be bothered collecting it. They were just playing for no reason. The amount of money going through there is mind-boggling, absolutely mind-boggling. But that sort of thing, that's the underbelly that you don't really see about that. And then the laundering of money, like there was a lot of things put in place by Austrac to try and stop a lot of that, but not 100% effective.
And as far as I'm aware, out of that whole Royal Commission that we had, no one's actually gone to jail. If a director of any other company was found guilty of that level of tax avoidance, that level of money laundering, somebody would be in jail.
Yes.
Should be in jail, yeah.
Yeah, and that's not going to happen in Victoria.
No.
No, a fruitier with 100 grand cash might get a sentence.
Yeah.
A couple 100 million, forget it.
Yeah, and then again too, when we come back to violent crimes, things that actually affect us, but taxation, don't give the government their share of your wrongdoings. I'll go after you for tax. Now, I think it was Joan Kerner that originally approved Melbourne Casino as it was. And if I'm right, Barangaroo was originally slated as public land, as an open space for public land. Who overturned that? Are we aware?
Yeah, New South Wales government.
Yeah, Labor or Liberal?
Labor government. I don't think New South Wales wouldn't have mattered, really.
Yeah. So again, do we get our share? Again, profits are going off now. I imagine with Blackstone now as the hedge fund that owns it, Crown as the management company, do we now lose more of our marginalized people or unfortunate problem gamblers? More of that money, is that now going overseas into that hedge fund?
Probably.
Yeah.
Most probably, yeah.
And again, sorry, eh?
No, I say you have, and I guess this is where I probably agree with John and what he said in the beginning. Once you have the infrastructure, etc., you have to look at what's the best way out of this. And I don't think anyone should get away from, should be allowed to get out of breaking laws. That you have to have a justice system that's effective and penalises one way or the other. In terms of who owns whatever, if we have investment from other countries or people offshore, we want investment in Australia, we want investment in businesses, etc. I don't think you can start picking and choosing whether they're entertainment, you know, i.e. gambling or whatever, versus any other sort of investment. It's a fact that it is just that they need to be abiding by the laws surrounding whatever business they're in.
Yeah.
Interesting.
The other thing too is if they were too big to fail now, what stops them from being too big to fail again, even though they're on their provisional license? And you would think Blackstone with that amount of money.
The way to get around that is that when they're in Melbourne, when they've got a 2-year period to get their act right, you should have done a parallel expression of interest to test the market, to see what's out there.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. So, yeah, that could have been done.
Yeah.
Well, that also goes back to what they did with those fishing licenses and things. It's like, you know, if you're on your last chance, there's more, and you've got a huge investment, then chances are you'll probably try and make sure everything is done properly. But as you just said, Michael, the question is it too big? Is there too much money involved? Are there too many assets involved?
Yeah. We've also seen Star Casino come unstuck in some of theirs. So is there anything such, you know, who do we need to put in charge, and what could they actually change? Is it the lack of enforcement that encourages the lack of compliance, as Ian was saying with the abalone licenses? Is it we'll get away with this until we don't, and then we'll pay the minimum fund? Is it the fact that there's no actual jail time for directors and those in charge? What can they do to really, you know, stop this?
A good question. Yeah, I think the government is actually need to look into all of this. They have the power. They have the decision-making models and the auditing, and just to name the few. I truly believe that government is the one who can actually break it or make it.
Unfortunately, I think that's a bit like the fox looking after the hen house.
That's a good idea.
It's funny though, isn't it? The director's responsibility hasn't really applied in any of these applications, and these directors will go on to sit on boards and other directorships in other companies, without a doubt.
Yeah, and you know what, Michael, if you broke ASIC's federal laws, the laws that apply to directors, and you're not a friend of any particular government, etc., but it's reasonably high profile, and you took someone down, whatever the laws you breached, I guarantee you they come after you, you know, at 1,000,000 miles an hour. What you're saying, and this is what you keep coming back to, is that there are rules for some, i.e. how wealthy you are, and there are rules for everybody else. So the everybody else get put up as the, see, we caught one, but it's always smaller than the really big fish.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of hanging the fox on the fence, trying to deter all the other fox. The foxes are going to keep being the foxes regardless of the one on the fence.
Look,
yeah, the one on the fence just says, hey, the competition is less now.
Yeah, and he's also seen as less foxy than the other foxes, a bit of a dud as far as foxing go, because he got caught.
Yeah, well, that's the Darwinian theory. The foxes keep getting better if you keep hanging out the dumb ones.
Yep. All right, team. Well, we'll leave it there. It's interesting to see. I'm sure Tim Costello's wringing his hands with this. I'm sure we'll see the negative impacts of this flow on, but it'll be obfuscated by the bright, shiny lights and the nice restaurants and all of the glitzy stuff. Meanwhile, while households are breaking up because of gambling. So again, thanks for your time, guys, and look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you so much.
No worries. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.